Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The ancient timepiece, a guardian of the library's silence, struck 3, its sonorous chimes reverberating within the majestic chamber. Deep in concentration, Carl, oblivious to the passing hours, jolted at the familiar sound. He adjusted his vintage spectacles, their gleaming lenses revealing a reflection of the hazy sunbeams piercing through the lofty windows. Shadows played with light on the grand library's varnished floors, mingling with the floating dust particles, orchestrating a silent symphony.
"Carl, you old scholar, it's quittin' time!"
Startled, Carl found his buddies, Tom, Mike, and the effervescent Rachel, grinning at him from across the desk. Their excited faces shone beneath the soft glow of the desk lamp.
"Nearly done,"
Carl assured them softly, his fingers instinctively straightening his formal attire, an unconscious gesture from his years as the guardian of knowledge. He shot them an apologetic look over the rims of his glasses. Rachel's silky hair brushed her face as she leaned forward, curious. "Come on, Carl. Live a little. The books will still be here tomorrow." Carl sighed, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth.
All right. Let me just finish up here."
As he logged out of the computer system and gathered his things, Carl couldn't help but feel a flutter of anxiety in his stomach. His friends had been trying to coax him out of his shell for years, but he always felt more comfortable surrounded by the familiar scent of old books and the predictable routine of library work. The group made their way out into the warm evening air. The street was alive with the bustle of people heading home from work or out for the night. Carl trailed behind his friends, listening to their animated chatter.
"So, where are we headed?"
he asked, trying to keep the apprehension out of his voice. Tom clapped him on the back, nearly knocking the wind out of him.
"We thought we'd start with dinner at that new place on 4th Street, then maybe hit up a club afterward."
Carl nodded, forcing a smile. The idea of a noisy, crowded club made his palms sweat, but he didn't want to disappoint his friends. They had, after all, gone out of their way to include him in their plans. The restaurant was bustling when they arrived, filled with the clinking of cutlery and the hum of conversation. They were seated at a small table near the back, and Carl found himself wedged between Mike and Rachel. As they perused the menus, Mike leaned in conspiratorially.
"You know, Carl, we've been thinking. It's about time you stepped out of your comfort zone a bit."
Carl looked up, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Rachel giggled, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "We were thinking, how about a little dare?" Carl's stomach dropped. "A dare? I don't know, guys. I'm not really the daring type." Tom leaned across the table, his voice low.
"Come on. It'll be fun. Nothing too crazy, we promise."
Carl hesitated, his fingers nervously tracing the edge of his menu. "What kind of dare?" The 3 friends exchanged glances, barely containing their excitement. Finally, Rachel spoke up. "We dare you to try on a dress." Carl's eyes widened, and he nearly choked on his water.
"A dress? Are you serious?"
Mike nodded enthusiastically.
"Totally serious. Just for a laugh, you know? We'll even let you pick it out."
Carl's mind raced. The idea was absurd, completely out of character for him. And yet, there was a small part of him, buried deep down, that felt a flicker of curiosity.
I don't know,"
he stammered, his cheeks flushing. Rachel placed a gentle hand on his arm.
It's just for fun, Carl. No one will know except us. And if you really hate it, we'll never bring it up again.
Carl looked around at his friends' eager faces. They had always been there for him, supporting him through his shyness and insecurities. Maybe it was time he did something for them, even if it made him uncomfortable.
Okay,
he said finally, his voice barely audible.
I'll do it.
The table erupted in cheers, drawing curious glances from nearby diners. Carl sank lower in his seat, already regretting his decision. After dinner, the group made their way to a nearby thrift store. The shop was cluttered with racks of clothing, shelves of knickknacks, and the musty smell of second-hand items.
All right, Carl,
Tom said, rubbing his hands together.
Pick your poison.
Carl wandered through the racks, feeling completely out of his element. His fingers brushed against silks, cottons, and synthetic fabrics in a rainbow of colors. He paused at a simple black dress with a modest neckline and knee-length skirt.
This one, I guess,
he mumbled, pulling it off the rack. Rachel clapped her hands together. Perfect! Now let's find you some shoes to go with it. Before Carl could protest, his friends were scouring the store for accessories. They returned with a pair of low-heeled black pumps, a simple necklace, and even a wig of long blonde hair.
You guys are really going all out, aren't you?
Carl said, his voice a mix of amusement and resignation. Mike grinned.
If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right.
They paid for the items and headed back to Rachel's apartment. Carl's heart pounded in his chest as they rode the elevator up to her floor. This was crazy, he thought. What was he thinking, agreeing to this? Inside the apartment, Rachel led Carl to her bedroom. You can change in here, she said, handing him the bag of clothes. We'll wait in the living room. Carl nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. As the door closed behind him, he stared at the items laid out on the bed. His hands shook slightly as he began to undress. The fabric of the dress felt cool and smooth against his skin as he slipped it on. He struggled with the zipper for a moment before finally managing to pull it up. The shoes were a challenge, but he eventually got them on, wobbling slightly as he stood. Finally, he placed the wig on his head, adjusting it until it felt secure. He turned to look in the full-length mirror on the back of the door, and his breath caught in his throat. The person staring back at him was different. Softer, somehow. The dress hugged his slim frame in a way that was surprisingly flattering. The blonde hair of the wig framed his face, making his features appear more delicate. For a moment, Carl forgot about the dare, about his friends waiting in the other room. He was transfixed by his reflection, a strange feeling of rightness washing over him. A knock at the door startled him out of his reverie. Carl, you okay in there? Rachel called.
Yes,
he replied, his voice cracking slightly.
I'm coming out.
Taking a deep breath, Carl opened the door and stepped into the living room. His friends fell silent, their eyes widening as they took in his appearance. Wow, Tom said finally. You look good. Rachel nodded enthusiastically. Really good, actually. That dress suits you. Carl felt his cheeks burn.
Thanks,
he mumbled, not quite sure how to respond. Mike stood up, circling Carl with an appraising eye.
You know, with a little makeup you could really pass as a woman.
The words sent a jolt through Carl's body. Pass as a woman. The idea should have been ridiculous, embarrassing even. But instead,
it made him feel excited. "Do you want to try some makeup?" Rachel asked, picking up on Carl's reaction. Carl hesitated for a moment before nodding.
Okay,
he said softly. Rachel led him back to the bedroom, sitting him down at her vanity. With deft hands, she applied foundation, blush, and a subtle eyeshadow. She finished with a swipe of pale pink lipstick. "There," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "Take a look." Carl turned to the mirror, and his heart skipped a beat. The person looking back at him was undeniably feminine, soft, beautiful even. "What do you think?" Rachel asked gently. Carl swallowed hard, unable to tear his eyes away from his reflection. I like it," he whispered, surprising himself with the truth of the words. They rejoined the others in the living room, where Tom and Mike's jaws dropped anew.
"Carl, my man,"
Mike said, shaking his head in disbelief.
"You make one hell of a woman."
The compliment sent a thrill through Carl. He found himself standing a little straighter, a small smile playing on his lips. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. They stayed in, drinking wine and chatting. Carl found himself relaxing, laughing more freely than he had in years. The dress and makeup, rather than making him feel awkward, gave him a strange sense of confidence. As the night wore on, Carl found himself not wanting it to end. The thought of taking off the dress, of washing away the makeup, and returning to his old self filled him with an inexplicable sadness. Finally, as the clock struck midnight, Carl knew it was time to go home. He changed back into his own clothes, carefully hanging up the dress and placing the wig back in its bag. "You can keep those if you want," Rachel said as he prepared to leave. "Consider it a souvenir of your wild night." Carl nodded, grateful for the offer.
"Thanks,"
he said, his voice quiet.
"For everything."
As he made his way home, the cool night air on his face, Carl couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted within him. The memory of his reflection in the mirror, of the person he had become for a few short hours, lingered in his mind. Over the next few days, Carl found himself distracted at work. His thoughts kept drifting back to that night, to the feeling of the dress against his skin, the way the makeup had transformed his features. He caught himself daydreaming about trying on different outfits, experimenting with various styles of makeup. At first, he tried to push these thoughts away. It was just a dare, he told himself. A one-time thing. But the desire persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. A week after the dare, Carl found himself standing outside a department store, his heart racing. Before he could talk himself out of it, he walked inside, making his way to the women's section. He browsed the racks, his fingers lingering on soft fabrics and pretty patterns. Finally, he selected a simple sundress with a floral print. He added a pair of sandals and some basic makeup to his basket. The cashier barely glanced at him as she rang up his purchases, but Carl felt as though everyone in the store was staring. Back in the safety of his apartment, Carl carefully laid out his new acquisitions on the bed. His hands trembled slightly as he changed into the sundress. It fit well, the light fabric swishing around his legs as he moved. He applied the makeup carefully, following tutorials he'd found online. When he was done, he stood before the mirror, taking in his appearance. The person looking back at him felt right. More right than he had ever felt in his own skin before. In that moment, Carl realized that this was more than just a lingering effect of the dare. This was something deeper, something that had been waiting to emerge for a long time. Over the next few months, Carl's secret indulgence became a regular part of his life. He began building a wardrobe, learning to style his own wig, perfecting his makeup techniques. In the privacy of his apartment, he could be someone else, someone who felt true to herself. As time passed, Carl found himself longing to share this part of himself with the world. The idea of going out dressed as a woman both terrified and exhilarated him. Finally, one Friday evening, he worked up the courage to do it. He chose a pretty blue dress and spent extra time on his makeup and hair. With shaking hands, he grabbed his purse and stepped out of his apartment. The walk to the nearby coffee shop felt like the longest journey of his life. Inside the cafe, Carl ordered a latte, his voice soft and slightly higher than usual. The barista smiled at him, complimenting his dress. Carl felt a rush of joy and relief wash over him. As he sat at a small table, sipping his coffee and watching the world go by, Carl felt a sense of peace settle over him. This, he realized, was who he was meant to be. From that day forward, Carl began living a double life. At work and around his old friends, he remained Carl, the shy librarian. But in his free time, he allowed himself to become someone new, someone he named Madeline. Madeline grew more confident with each passing day. She made new friends, joined a book club, even started dating. Carl's life began to feel like a constrictive cocoon, one that Madeline was increasingly eager to shed. It was on a crisp autumn morning, nearly a year after that fateful dare, that Carl made the decision to fully embrace his true self. He submitted his resignation at the library and began the process of legally changing his name and gender. The transition wasn't easy. There were difficult conversations with family and friends, moments of doubt and fear. But through it all, Madeline held on to the memory of that first night, of the feeling of rightness that had washed over her when she saw her true self in the mirror. Now, as Madeline stood in front of her closet, choosing an outfit for her first day at her new job, she marveled at how far she had come. The shy librarian was gone, replaced by a confident woman who knew exactly who she was. She selected a smart blazer and skirt combo in a deep burgundy, pairing it with black pumps and subtle gold jewelry. As she applied her makeup with practiced ease, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. It had all started with a dare, a simple challenge from friends who had no idea of the profound change they were setting in motion. Madeline smiled at her reflection, touching up her lipstick one last time. As she prepared to step out into the world, fully and unapologetically herself, Madeline felt a surge of gratitude. Gratitude for the friends who had unknowingly set her on this path, for the strength she had found within herself, and for the life that now stretched out before her, a life lived authentically. She grabbed her purse and keys, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The world was waiting, and Madeline was finally ready to meet it as her true self. As she walked down the street, heels clicking confidently on the pavement, Madeline couldn't help but smile. She caught her reflection in a store window, a tall, elegant woman with blonde hair and a purposeful stride. It was still sometimes surprising to see herself this way, but it never failed to fill her with joy. Her new job was at a publishing house, a dream she had harbored for years, but never quite had the confidence to pursue as Carl. As she entered the sleek office building, Madeline felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. This was a fresh start, a chance to build a career as her authentic self. "Good morning!" The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile. "You must be Madeline. Welcome to Riverside Publishing." "Thank you," Madeline replied, her voice clear and confident. "I'm excited to be here." As she was shown to her new desk, Madeline thought about how different this felt from her days at the library. There, she had always tried to blend into the background, to be as unobtrusive as possible. Now, she stood tall, making eye contact with her new colleagues and returning their smiles. The day passed in a whirlwind of introductions, orientations, and new information. Madeline found herself thriving in the dynamic environment, offering ideas in meetings and quickly forming connections with her team members. During her lunch break, she stepped out to a nearby park, needing a moment to process the morning's events. As she sat on a bench, watching people stroll by, she pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hello?" Rachel's voice came through the speaker. "Hey, it's me," Madeline said, a smile in her voice. "Madeline, how's the first day going?" Madeline leaned back, closing her eyes as she felt the warm sun on her face. "It's going really well. Better than I could have imagined, actually." "I'm so happy for you," Rachel said sincerely. "You know, I still can't believe how all of this started. Who would have thought a silly dare would lead to, well, you?" Madeline laughed softly. "I know. It's pretty incredible when you think about it. I owe you guys so much." "You don't owe us anything," Rachel insisted. "You did all the hard work. We just gave you a little push, I guess." They chatted for a few more minutes before Madeline had to return to the office. As she walked back, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about Carl, the person she used to be, the shy, reserved librarian who had been too afraid to pursue his dreams, who had hidden behind stacks of books and thick-rimmed glasses. She felt a wave of compassion for that version of herself, understanding now that all of those years of discomfort and uncertainty had been leading to this. Back at her desk, Madeline threw herself into her work with renewed energy. She was proofreading a manuscript when her supervisor stopped by. "How's it going, Madeline?" he asked, leaning against her desk. She looked up with a smile. "Great, actually. I'm really enjoying this manuscript." He nodded approvingly. "Good to hear. You know, I was a bit concerned when HR told me we were hiring someone who had recently transitioned. I wasn't sure how it would affect the team dynamic." Madeline tensed slightly, unsure where this conversation was heading. Her supervisor continued, "But I have to say, you fit in seamlessly. Your work is excellent, and you've already become a valuable part of the team. I'm glad you're here." Madeline felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she managed to say. "That means a lot to me." As her supervisor walked away, Madeline took a deep breath, blinking back tears of relief and happiness. This, she realized, was what acceptance felt like. It was a feeling she had craved for so long without even knowing it. The rest of the day passed quickly, and before she knew it, it was time to head home. As she gathered her things, one of her new colleagues, a woman named Jenna, approached her desk. "Hey, Madeline," Jenna said with a friendly smile. "A few of us are going out for drinks to celebrate the end of the Anderson project. Want to join us?" A year ago, even a few months ago, Carl would have politely declined such an invitation, retreating to the safety and solitude of home. But Madeline found herself nodding enthusiastically. "I'd love to," she said. "Just let me freshen up a bit." In the bathroom, Madeline touched up her makeup and smoothed down her hair. As she looked at herself in the mirror, She saw not just her outward appearance, but the confident, happy woman she had become. The bar was crowded and noisy, filled with the after-work crowd. Madeline found herself in the middle of a group of her new colleagues, laughing at their jokes and sharing stories of her own. She sipped her wine slowly, savoring not just the taste, but the moment itself. As the evening wore on, Madeline excused herself to step outside for some fresh air. The night was cool and clear, the street lit by the warm glow of street lamps. She leaned against the building, taking in the sights and sounds of the city at night. A familiar voice called out to her.
Madeline.
She turned to see Tom, one of the friends who had been there on the night of the dare. He was standing a few feet away, a look of surprise on his face.
Tom,
she said, smiling warmly. It's good to see you. He approached her, his expression a mix of amazement and admiration.
Wow, you look amazing.
I almost didn't recognize you. Madeline laughed softly. Well, a lot has changed since we last saw each other. Tom nodded, his eyes taking in her appearance.
I can see that. You seem happy.
I am, Madeline said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Happier than I've ever been. They talked for a while, Madeline filling Tom in on the major events of her transition and her new life. As they spoke, she could see understanding dawning in his eyes.
You know,
Tom said finally, I've always felt a little guilty about that dare. I was worried we had pushed you into something you weren't comfortable with. But seeing you now, I think maybe we just helped you find yourself. Madeline reached out and squeezed his hand. You did. You all did. And I'm grateful for that. Every single day. As they said their goodbyes, Madeline felt a sense of closure. She had feared running into her old friends, worried about their reactions. But Tom's acceptance and genuine happiness for her lifted a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Rejoining her colleagues inside, Madeline felt a renewed sense of belonging. These people knew her only as Madeline, and they accepted her completely. It was a gift she never took for granted. As the night wound down and people began to leave, Jenna linked her arm through Madeline's. This was fun, she said. We should do it again soon. Madeline nodded, feeling a warm glow of friendship. Definitely, she agreed. Later, as she walked home through the quiet streets, Madeline reflected on the day. Her first day at a new job, in a new life. It had been everything she had hoped for, and more. Entering her apartment, she kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. She moved through her evening routine, removing her makeup, changing into comfortable pajamas, brewing a cup of herbal tea. As she settled onto her couch, cradling the warm mug in her hands, Madeline looked around her home. It was filled with memories of her journey, photos of her with friends, both old and new, books that had guided her through her transition, the dress from that first fateful night hanging in her closet like a talisman. She thought about how far she had come, from the shy librarian who could barely look people in the eye to the confident woman she was today. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been unquestionably worth it. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Madeline felt a deep sense of peace. She was living her truth, surrounded by people who accepted and supported her. She was building a career she loved, forming new friendships, and exploring all the possibilities that life had to offer. And it had all started with a dare, a simple challenge that had unlocked something profound within her. Madeline smiled to herself in the darkness. She couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring, what new adventures awaited her in this life she had claimed for herself. As she closed her eyes, her last thought was one of gratitude for the friends who had unknowingly set her on this path, for the strength she had found within herself, and for the beautiful, authentic life she was now living. Madeline's journey was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. But now, finally, she was living it as her true self, and she wouldn't have it any other way.
Thanks for watching, my girlies. Be sure to check out Patreon for more.